On this episode of the Fully Charged Show podcast, we welcome Chelsea Sexton onto the show for the first time. And with the font of knowledge that is contained within her cranium, Robert and Chelsea go through the recent announcements from GM that they plan to invest $20 billion in their all-electric platforms and autonomous vehicles through to 2025. Is this all a smokescreen, or are they getting serious about going electric? There's also some other stuff about will subscription plans work for EVs. Chelsea chats about the logistics of getting the EV1 to fully charged live USA, further Cybertruck thoughts, and as a knock-on consequence, will the Ford F-150 electric be the leader still after the Rivian and Cybertruck are available to consumers? And something else really exciting is Robert has pre-recorded an advert for LV, and here it is.
So this episode of the Fully Charged podcast is sponsored by LV. Now, LV were the UK's first insurers who designed a cover specifically for electric vehicles. That's why their electrifying insurance targets problems specifically for EV drivers, offering battery cover for accidental damage, fire and theft, even if you're leasing it separately from the car. LV's electric vehicle insurance also comes with the same amazing features as their de facto 5-star rated car insurance, like a lifetime repair guarantee when using a recommended repair service. Search lv.com/electric and start getting a quote today. Or, alternatively, visit them at their booth at Fully Charged Live. Chelsea, it's very good to talk to you. Thank you very much for finding the time.
Likewise, always a pleasure.
Yeah, it's very exciting. That now, we were just discussing that we're going to try not to mention COVID-19, but it is actually having a massive effect. So I've just had 2 car launches cancelled that I was going to.
And multiple conferences. Yeah.
And all the conferences, forget it, yeah. And so that is going, I mean, that's one side of it, and I would imagine also that the actual manufacturing processes are going to be affected by it. I mean, I think it is directly going, it'll impact industry worldwide in every aspect, but it will definitely, I think, have an impact on electric car manufacturing.
Yeah, for sure, especially to the extent that many of the components come from overseas. Yeah. At the same time, people are a little bit increasingly concerned about the economy as well, and so in all likelihood, the desire for car purchases will probably be affected, and those things may actually correlate more than we expect, which is, in one way, unfortunate, but also it would be a good thing if we weren't so imbalanced either by supply or demand.
Yeah. Because, I mean, so the thing that caught my eye the other day was the announcement from General Motors. So, I mean, I didn't really get it. Couldn't quite work out what they're doing. There was basically hundreds of reports with big pictures of battery packs and drivetrains and things.
Yes,
but
and
didn't
very
really,
little else.
It didn't quite it didn't make me go, oh my goodness, this is a massive breakthrough in a total change. I mean, they're going to make more electric cars, which I kind of knew. Or is there more to it than that?
Well, I mean, all things GM are a little bit nuanced, given their history. Right. And it was a little bit of an unusual event. On one hand, it's kind of the type of event that people like me have encouraged them to do for years, and that they did some of in the early Volt days, when they were trying to convince the world they were serious again. So what became public was primarily a battery announcement, but at the same time, we've been hearing this, we're all in on EVs thing for so long, and we're all kind of just going, show me, don't tell me. And so the other thing that they did was invite in dozens of journalists and a few of us, sort of influencer-y types. And they brought out a dozen of those exact cars that are coming, or 10 in person and a couple in picture. And so they basically said, look, you can't have any cameras of any kind in here, but we're not kidding when we say we're coming with a bunch of EVs. Here they are. Right. Here's the next 3 or 4 years worth of EVs in the flesh. Some more in completion than others. Some were pretty much glorified clay models that were painted. But we also saw the new iteration of the Bolt coming at the end of the year, which is kind of a mid-cycle refresh. The larger Bolt coming next year, which it's basically the Prius V analogy to the Prius is the Bolt. They call it the EUV, but crossover, I think, is a generous term, but it's one being applied to anything that's not a sedan these days.
Yeah.
And then everything else is large stuff and expensive stuff. It's several Cadillacs, a couple of the Hummers. The Hummers were interesting to see, and of course they're using that brand is kind of controversial, but anyone who liked the FJ Cruiser will probably like the styling of these.
Right.
And multiple SUVs and huge sedans from Cadillac.
Right. Wow. So, because it makes sense with the car. I mean, I'm assuming what we'd call a saloon. What would you call that? I always get these words.
Sedan. Yeah.
But I mean, a big luxury,
long wheelbase.
Long wheelbase car.
Yes.
It lends itself to an electric vehicle, as we have seen. I mean, that's not such a big thing. But I mean, certainly that because the Hummer, of course, was announced at the Super Bowl, wasn't it? I mean,
and we all kind of went, "Oh my God, really?" From a branding perspective, you've got to be joking.
Yeah, because I think that was for me a very personal and very it was a very personal turning point for me that I had been in a Prius in Los Angeles. This would be a couple of years before I met you the first time. And then we were filming there, and then because we were doing a big hill climb episode, the production team got me a Hummer for a week so that I could drive. And so we used it on the set, and we drove up the hill in the Hummer and all that stuff. And so I was so excited. And it was a diesel, I think it was a V8 diesel Hummer with it had a rag top so that you could take the roof off, it was ridiculous thing, huge. And so I drove it to see some really nice friends who sort of cycle everywhere and are vegans and
how'd that go over?
So I drove to kind of a Echo Park in Los Angeles. So not a flash neighborhood. No, it was fine, perfectly right. But I drove down Sunset Boulevard in a Hummer, and the further east I went, the more people had sort of bikes and tattoos and sat outside nice organic cafes, and they saw an absolute idiot in a huge Hummer, and I felt so embarrassed and so humiliated by it. I think it made me go, I can't do this anymore. This is not right. And this was like 2003, maybe 2004, somewhere around then when we were filming there.
Right, and that's the interesting choice in I call it zombifying because it was a dead brand and they're kind of bringing it back to life, but it's a gamble. I mean, those that remember Hummer are of a certain age, which kind of makes sense for the type of EVs they're doing. They're doing expensive
they may have the money.
EVs. Yeah. Right, exactly. But at the same time, the brand stands for everything that is the opposite of even technological progressiveness. I mean, not just the eco side, it's such a bromobile. And this is basically the EV version of a bromobile.
Yeah.
But it's closer to Rivian than it is to Cybertruck. Closer to FJ Cruiser in styling, sort of more Jeepish than weird.
So it is a slightly redesigned. So from the one I drove back then, it doesn't look like the old, because that was like a military version of it. It was a sort of civilianified military vehicle. So this is slightly more stylized.
Yes, close. Yes, a little bit curvier, a little bit softer, closer to H3 than the original H1 military style.
I know what you mean.
But nevertheless, I mean, on one hand, not unlike the Mach-E, if the name is the most polarizing aspect of the vehicle, then great. Like, it's a good day for all of us who want more EVs. At the same time, what this event really showed in the flesh was how much GM is going to focus on very large and very expensive EVs. And the part that still remains is that, especially in the U.S., there's this whole, Trump EPA versus California Resources Board fight between the two agencies, and GM has sided with the EPA. So it's a little bit odd for them to try to say, hey, we're siding with the side that wants to roll back emission standards, but you should believe us and give us credit for being all in on EVs.
Wow.
And many of us are just kind of going, you can't have it both ways. You can side with whomever you want, but you can't expect leadership credibility, not just compliance credibility, but leadership while doing that.
That is, that is so extraordinary. I think that is at the moment the key difference between our two countries, because in so many other aspects we're horrifyingly similar.
Right. Yes, exactly.
But on that particular aspect, there is. it's really, you know, the electric vehicles here are not, I guess, not as politicized. I mean, there are individuals who hate them and think they're ridiculous and a liberal conspiracy to crush freedom.
Well, aren't they? I mean, really, come on, they're all Obama cars.
But we don't. I mean, it's nothing like to the extent that it is in America, and also the actual. You know, the recent budget, we just had a budget the other day. Well, there's a huge amount of support for electric vehicles, for charging infrastructure, for renewable energy, for onshore wind. You know, it's like we've got a green government that is so tightly aligned with President Trump. Right. In other aspects, you go, I don't know the world's gone mad.
Yeah. Well, but at the same time, the more progressive conservatives see that there's money in it. So it's not that they necessarily think of it from an eco perspective.
No. I've always seen, you know, that I grew up with crazy hippie engineers that wanted to create an alternative society and live in communes, geodesic domes and wind turbines. And it never was going to do anything. And it was the two engineers I knew who then went on to work for massive energy companies making huge wind turbines that they put offshore that, you know, had a career. They've now retired. That's how old I am. But, you know, because it made money, because if you put a wind farm off the coast of the UK in the middle of the sea, it costs hundreds of millions to put it in. It makes hundreds of millions of dollars a year. They make money.
Right, for sure.
Economic.
And that's
it's an
the
economic
path forward.
decision. Yeah.
And that was an interesting aspect even of the fully charged panels in Austin, was this notion of how much does it matter if car companies do EVs for the reason you want them to. So the Tesla guys were, you know, the pro-Tesla fans were all very much like, no, Elon's the only one doing it for the right reason, and it doesn't matter if Volkswagen builds 5 million EVs if they don't do it for that reason. It's like, at this point, who cares? If EVs are what we need, I don't mind that Carlos Ghosn started them because he thought there were millions to be made. That's fine. Capitalism
also,
is
ironically,
fine.
with all that stuff, I mean, because it's such I'm determined to remain neutral in the Tesla debate, even though I drive one. You know, I'm not going to take sides. But the whole point is, the hero of the Tesla fanboys is always saying. Right. It's brilliant that other people are making electric cars. That's the whole point. We want them to, you know.
Yes.
Which is, you know, he's never flinched from that. That's always been his.
Well, he also says they suck, but you know, there's a bit of narrative revision over time.
Yeah.
But many things can be true at once. Is kind of what it comes down
to. Exactly. Yeah. No, I mean so that is really interesting then about GM. I mean, it is intriguing that just before the virus took every single headline in the world, and for very understandable reasons, you know, I was really getting this torrent of news about all the traditional manufacturers bringing out. I mean, all that. I was just about to drive the Lexus UX 300, which is the most annoying car in the world. I see posters for it everywhere here because it's always a self-charging hybrid.
Right,
but
always.
They've made a 100% electric version.
Yeah.
And that's what I was going to try, and now I'm not because it's been cancelled. But I think they're sending one here eventually. I'll get one delivered.
Yeah, I mean, I think the GM event was probably one of the last major events to happen before everything has shut down. So we kind of skated it under the wire, and it was a little bit dicey for a while. And the battery announcement actually is the most substantive piece of it all, but also the least newsworthy in some ways because it's great that they're getting ready to go fast. The battery announcement is basically that they have come up with an improved battery in partnership with LG, and they're doing a fairly flexible modular pack that they can make in multiple sizes and use either pouch cells, primarily for the US, or prismatic, which is primarily what China uses. Right. Which is not unlike other announcements that, say, Volkswagen made a few years ago and things like that. So on one hand, yay that you're getting ready to go fast. We all look forward to seeing lots and lots and lots of EVs, but it's also kind of what you would expect in terms of supply chain fulfillment from any major auto manufacturer. Yeah. It's good that they're not resting on the same sort of excuses of Jaguar and others of, oh gosh, we can't get our hands on enough batteries or we build more EVs. Yeah. That's not a very responsible response, but at the same time, I think they probably were hoping for more credit out of the battery announcement than they may have gotten from the mainstream market.
Right, and it's not a completely revolutionary battery chemistry thing. It is just it'll be a slightly more energy dense.
Well, and it's lower cobalt, and that's the direction that everyone is going. So to the extent that the battery itself is an improved chemistry, it's primarily to try to minimize the cobalt.
Right.
But the design implications of we're making all this modular stuff, well, that's good. That's great. It's also exactly what I would expect of you. So
yes.
sort of fulfilling what you need to fulfill is maybe not as revolutionary as you want it to be seen.
Yeah. No, I mean, and I think that's, you could say the same with Ford, you know.
Right.
I mean, I enjoy, I've only ridden in the back of the
Mach-E.
the Ford Mach-E, yeah. It's very comfortable. It wasn't bad, but, you know, they wouldn't let anyone drive it yet. But it was sort of, you know, it was good, but it wasn't like...
Right.
It was good. That's all I can say. It was good.
Yeah,
I'm really glad they're doing it.
Most EVs are that. Most EVs are all really pretty good. We all have our subjective favorites, but there's none that are like, oh God, that is so terrible.
No.
But, except for, the Tesla fans will always have Teslas.
Yes.
But aside from that, they're going to have to stop competing on, the horsepower measuring contest and the torque measuring contest. Like, some of that stuff is going to have to come down to who's trying to differentiate themselves by making good, affordable EVs. It's interesting that in the wake of GM, in the same week as GM's announcing all these Cadillacs and things, Ford is saying, but we're going to make a transit van. We're going to go, small, medium, fleet size stuff.
Yes.
Mid-size.
Which is much more important, I think,
For sure, and it's been an empty space in the market. More premium vehicles has not been an empty space.
No,
more variety
full.
of body style is what we need.
Yeah, I mean, if someone, like a big manufacturer that came up with I've just driven the VW E up exclamation mark, which they've upgraded. I didn't realise they'd done it. So it now has a 32.5 kilowatt hour battery. Tiny little car.
Right.
Brilliant. It's got
I desperately want cars that are only available in Europe. I like the E-Up. I like the ID3. I lust after the Honda E.
The Honda E is beautiful.
So does my child, my 21-year-old boy that's never known a time before EVs. I keep teasing Honda. Like, when both me and my kid are lusting after the same car,
that's a fairly good sign.
You've done something right.
Yeah.
But that you won't bring it outside of Europe is less compelling.
I didn't realize. I knew about the VWs. I didn't know about Honda. So Honda they're not releasing the Honda E in.
No.
There is if it was just California.
Right.
There's a huge market for it. Yeah.
Yes. And we have 2 more CARB states all of a sudden, which is an interesting thing in the wake of this whole administration versus CARB fight. Colorado joined a few months ago. Washington joined this week.
Wow.
So we're getting to the majority of the market being in actual CARB states.
Yes, yeah. Which is going to make that. I mean, I think it is those 2 things. I'm still slightly mystified. Now, I wonder whether you've got a take on this. In the amount of, now I won't go to any more, but the talks I've been to in the last 6 months, particularly in one case, really focused on battery technology.
Yes.
And on battery technology and cost.
Yes.
And all the graphs I've seen of the cost of batteries. So when we first talked about electric cars, they were really, really expensive. They
well
were
over $1,000 a kilowatt hour.
A kilowatt hour, amazing.
Yeah.
And now they're not. They are, $150 a kilowatt
give or take. Yeah.
But why aren't we now getting small electric cars for $10,000? Because they're so easy to make and cheap.
And everyone is still obsessed with more range. But I'm one of the unique people that has always seen a parallel path for 150, 200-mile cars that continue to get cheaper. Yeah. And at some point, those paths will converge when everyone can have a 300-mile range car for $10,000 or $20,000. Yeah. But until then, we do need some more commuter cars that are not pretending to be anything else. They're urban vehicles that get cheaper.
Yes, that are cheaper. Yeah. No, I mean it's also the kind of the model. So some of the models that are coming out of the startup companies where you don't buy a car, you have a car. Well, I like the one you went to see,
Canoe.
The Canoe, which actually I love that and I want that to work. I'm sure there's plenty of reasons why it won't, but I don't
know that it won't. But so far, what I find interesting is that the notion, the pitch is basically you pay a monthly payment for a car that you have all the time. So you're not necessarily sharing it or anything. It's your car, and you do it on a monthly subscription. We call that a lease.
Yeah, we do as well. Yeah.
Anyone that finances a car is already doing that. So they're trying to spin it as this truly disruptive, revolutionary thing. It's like Netflix and all that. And it's like, no, it's like people buy their cars today. Right. They're used to financing. They're used to monthly payment. The main pitch here is that if you wanted to end that term early, you don't have to pay a penalty.
Right.
Could be an interesting development, but I don't find it as wholeheartedly earth-shattering as the PR pitches. So I think it'll work fine. The creativity that could come is the part that remains an unknown, because even the major automakers that have tried to do premium subscription plans where you can pay a monthly payment and then exchange it for other models and all those things, none of them have worked. None of them have survived from a financial standpoint. So people are trying to tweak that particular model and are starting to gravitate more towards using used cars to fulfill this. So in most of the subscription plans, you're not going to have a brand spanking new car. You'll have a lately used one and continue to be able to trade that as you desire. But that's how they're getting around the economics.
Right. Because I think that's the one thing we're definitely going to see. And I've decided I like to do assumptions, not predictions.
Yes, right.
I'm assuming this, which means it could completely go wrong. But from experience, so I have a Nissan Leaf here, 2011 Nissan Leaf, that I'm replacing the battery this year as a project for fully charged.
Yes, of course.
But the thing, because it had lousy range when it was new, so it's actually, and it's got slightly
had half
worse.
the range of an EV1 when it was new.
Yes. and particularly if you turn the heating on, don't turn the heater on. But it's incredibly reliable. I've driven, just come up to 70,000 miles and it's never done anything than switch on, drive, charge it. It's just, and it's really solidly built car, and it's got scratches and dents. We've run it into fence posts. I've reversed it into rocks. It's not in mint condition by any means. It's a well-used car.
Doesn't need to be.
Mechanically, it's super sound. It's just passed its, we have a thing called the MOT, Ministry of. It really dates it. MOT stood for Ministry of Transport, which I think disappeared in about 1957. Anyway, but it's just past that. The brakes are fine. Its brakes and tyres are really the only thing I've had to do anything with in that time.
Right, which is the same consumable stuff you'd have to do on any car.
Yeah, any car, And so once it's got a new battery in, same size, same weight, double the capacity. It's extraordinary that in that period of time. I don't know what the range will be. I'll find out when I drive it back from Amsterdam.
Yes. Most of the replacement battery schemes are small entrepreneurial folks around the world that are trying to do these. Yeah. So they're very homegrown projects. There's one in New Zealand. I know there's one in Canada and obviously Amsterdam. Yeah. And so it'll be interesting to see both how those work out and how Nissan responds to them.
Yes. I haven't asked them, but it's my car, so they can't do anything about it. But they're very nice, generally. But no, the reason I'm saying that is because the cars, I think we're going to find, will last longer than we expect. Because all the predictions 10 years ago was you'll throw the battery away, they're no good, they'll run out. And what's happening now is when you see even the Tesla Model X that's done 400,000 miles, and I don't know if you saw that, they listed all the parts they had to replace, which was a lot. It cost a lot of money to keep that car on the road for 400,000 miles. None of them were the motor, the battery. It was all peripheral lights, tyres, wheels, steering assemblies, suspension, all those things needed replacing. Not the battery and the bloody motors were fine.
Right. Well, and even on something like that, if we're honest, there's a fair amount of those components that would be more a product of the Model X having been a very early program at the time. Yeah. And that, in fairness, Tesla's quality has improved as it has spent some time manufacturing each of its vehicles. And so the early models of anything, whoever makes it, just simply are not going to be quite as robust as later versions of it. And we'll see some of that in the several 100,000-mile EVs. But that doesn't change the fact that once anybody gets a couple years of manufacturing under their belt, all of those cars and those components, too, become much more bulletproof.
Well, Nissan Leaf's a good example. Because mine was built in Japan. It was one of the first 500 they ever made, which is kind of why I want to keep it. But, but then the other experience I've had, a Model S going over a pothole that's just down the road from where I live, it made this sort of noise. It was kind of, there was quite a lot of bits which were wobbling. Now, if I go over it in the Model 3, I try and avoid it. But if I don't, if there's a truck coming the other way, I have to hit that pothole. It just goes dum-dum. And it's so tight, it doesn't go...
Yes, right. As much as the Tesla Roadster remains my favorite of their models, because I like smaller cars, it is very much a hand-built car, and it shows. Yeah. And it's a little bit of a labor of love to continue driving them after a point, because they are little rattle traps, as fun as they are to drive.
Also, I had to have 2 young men help me to get out. After I'd driven it for 2.5 hours, I was stuck. That was embarrassing. One of them couldn't do it. They had to kind of lean over.
Oh, no.
To point me out. I just couldn't get out. I can't get out. It's Just too difficult. Yeah, that was embarrassing. Anyway,
that's more our problem than their problem, though.
Yeah, I mean, I've also driven a Lotus, whatever it was based on, Lotus Elise, was it? And I couldn't get out. I had to kind of crawl out on my hands and knees to get out of that. So it wasn't unique to a Tesla. It was a Lotus, and an age issue. I'm just going to have some water. But yeah, sorry, to get back to that, the idea that you can have second-hand or shared vehicles, that's always struck me as a thing with electric vehicles. Is when I had the last combustion car I had was a Volkswagen Golf R32. Yeah. Which I loved, 6-speed gearbox, and it had a clutch. And it always worried me if someone else drove it. I thought they'll burn the clutch out, they'll crash the gears, they'll thrash it too much and break something. I didn't want other people to drive it. It was very much because it was so delicate and complicated. Yes. Now I look back. Electric car, you go, yeah, have a go in it. Doesn't
Here you go.
Yeah. I mean, they might crash it into a post or something, but
you're not going to fundamentally hurt it by driving it.
No. Yeah. And that's a really big change with when I've driven shared car share things in Berlin and Paris. The electric ones, you just go, God, this works with these.
Yeah, and the shared thing is a little newer. I mean, the American mindset on sharing things is not as progressive as it is around the world.
I don't think we're not any good at it in this country. I think in mainland Europe, they're a bit more advanced. In Berlin, they're fairly hip. But that was a fascinating thing. There was a really successful company called Car2Go that did car sharing in Berlin. Yeah. Hugely popular. And then I had, at a conference that I could go to before all that was a couple of years ago, I met one of the founders of it. We had dinner together, and he said that it was really interesting. Their usage rates went down. So there was this amazing period where they went up. The private ownership of cars went down in Greater Berlin. There was more parking space. Everyone used Car2Go or scooters. Yeah. And then people had children. That generation of people had children. They suddenly, and he said, I saw one morning as I was cycling to work, I saw a man walking along a road with a baby in a car seat, opening a Car2Go car and strapping the baby in. And he said he knew that 2 weeks later he'd have a Volvo.
Yep, for sure.
And that's what really, really changed it. It was, and it did. I mean, I think it's still going, but it certainly went through. But I would imagine that's a generational thing that will happen. There'll be younger people that will come up and.
Exactly, but also Car2Go was premised on smart cars only, really.
Yes. Yeah.
And so part of these shared schemes will have to accommodate them when people start to have families. They need more than 2-seater car. When they have babies, they want something with a back seat because you're not supposed to strap a car seat into a front seat of anything.
No.
So they have to start accommodating those that on one hand foster the mindset, but accommodate it as it grows. And we had Car2Go for a minute and a half in my little tiny town. If we still had it, I'd get rid of my car tomorrow. Right. I am one of those people that literally walks more than I drive. Yeah. And I have this really old car around for just that occasional use. But a Car2Go thing, or any decent transit, would basically alleviate my need for a car altogether.
Yeah. It is weird, isn't it? Yes, I think that is the peculiar thing, is that I came into this not a fan of car. I've sort of, the fact that I had an R32 Golf, I've had to admit now, shows that I was a bit of a fan of ridiculous, silly cars. I did love the sound that car made. I've actually been driving in a Nissan Leaf in a traffic jam, in heavy traffic in London, and an R32 went past, and I opened the window, turned my audio book down so I could hear the exhaust note of an R32. It's got a lovely tone.
Yes, you just need the fix once in a while.
Yeah. Yeah. But generally, though, it was extraordinary, because, of course, we should explain about Austin, Texas, the Fully Charged live show. The fact that a lot of people turned up, which I was amazed at, because I was very, very sceptical when that was first mooted as an idea. Why don't we do a live show in America, in Texas? What? Crazy. But what is
on
interesting,
Super Bowl Sunday.
On Super Bowl Sunday, we could not have got it worse. Yeah, absolute numpties. But it was a huge success. A lot of people, amazing amount of people turned up at it, and an enormous amount of interest in electric vehicles, because I don't know what the percentage of electric car sales is. I know it's low, but what it is in the United States, it's about 2% here.
We're just below 2% nationwide.
Right.
I'm not sure what it currently is in Texas specifically. California is 6% and higher, sort of month to month, and we've had a few months that have been 10%. But obviously, we've been at it in California for 25 years.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
Austin is obviously a more progressive area of Texas,
Yeah.
and so there's pockets.
I'm sure you could drive 100 miles in any direction from Austin, and probably it would be a slightly different...
We did drive 500 miles to Austin from Oklahoma.
I know!
And it was a bit of a funny thing because, of course, we towed the EV1 with the Audi e-tron, and so we had this big trailer, and every charging station we stopped at, we basically had to block all the chargers because of the trailer.
Because of the trailer.
And we all stayed there in case somebody else needed a charge. Yeah. But being Oklahoma and some of Texas, we did not encounter a single other EV wanting to charge at any
that is
station.
Interesting, though, that there was the charging infrastructure that you could use.
Yes.
That's the interesting thing. Even if you didn't see other electric vehicles, you could do it.
Oh, for sure. And because we were towing so much weight, the Audi's range was cut to about 110 or so miles.
Right.
So we didn't even have a particularly long range EV in the scheme of them. It wasn't a Tesla with 300 or 400 miles. And yet we mostly stuck to Electrify America and a couple of Francis Chargers, which is a local Oklahoma network.
Right.
So we skipped all the EV Go's and the charge points, and we drove past lots of chargers we could have also used, and we simply didn't need to. Yeah. Even on that particular route, which people would think of as not the main priority when it comes to freeways you'd want to build out, and they were fine.
Right.
Lots of Walmarts. We saw lots of Walmart country.
Right. Yes. Because that's the thing. It's that classic sort of. I think it's a peculiarly British fantasy, but I've never done that. So I've always wanted to drive across America. Not in a rush.
Right.
Take 2 months to do it. I mean, I'd still love to do it. One day I'll get around to it because that was, but that. So just to explain to listeners that don't know about this, the show was a big success, but I was very unwell and had to fly back to England, which I think
you were
particularly. Not that much. I think what was really, really, really encouraging was the show was a really big success, but very much partly down to you. Thank you so much. It was a success without me, which I think is a much better feeling than. If I wasn't there and it was a disaster and everybody hated it and walked away miserable, that would have been more depressing. It was particularly depressing for me because the build up to it was so enormous.
Yeah. Maybe there were people many were bummed to miss you for sure. Yeah. But it was a raging success.
Yeah.
And all the other panel moderators and stuff were so keen to jump in and just sort of split up what needed to be done. Yeah. And all of it, though, is still a testament to you and what you have built. So I get the humility thing, but you're just going to have to suck it up and let me say that out loud.
I have to suck it up. No, I do accept now. I mean, that I wouldn't have got to this stage without a lot of help from a lot of really good people. But the fact that I started it 10 years ago, I now acknowledge that was, I accept that. I have to accept. It's a really hard thing.
Isn't it, though?
For a British man of my generation to accept anything.
But that's why it's so fun for me to say, because it makes you blush and this is all sorts of fun.
I'm actually twitching now. I'm quite uncomfortable.
I can see it.
It's like being at the dentist. But now, the reaction to the EV1, because presumably there were loads of people there who would have known about it, but had never actually seen one. I mean, I'd never seen one. Tell us all that.
Yeah,
so,
and certainly had never seen one outside of a museum.
Yeah.
And so the fact that Tulsa and everybody involved with that little bit of the trip, which was kind of a fluke. I got this text one day from a local Oklahoma EAA guy, and he's like, "We have an EV1 to bring it to Austin." And I'm like, "Sure you do." I mean, I was completely skeptical. Where would you get your hands on one? And so finally I sussed it out, and it lives in Tulsa Tech now. It's been rotated through a few different universities in Oklahoma. And I knew the VIN number, and it turned out to be one that I had leased myself back in 1997. And so I tracked down the original owner of the car, or lessee of the car, and he sent me a picture of himself with it.
Wow.
And because it started here, and my husband and I working on the EV1 program, the recall sticker under the hood has my husband's handwriting on it, and it was very sweet, and lots of layers. But we went out there, and the volunteers had decided along the way that wouldn't it be cool if we could tow an EV with an EV, which narrows down the options. And I pinged Audi out of the blue and just said, I have this fluky wild hair idea. And everything was very, very silent through the holidays and through CES. And then a week before Fully Charged, it all just sort of blew up. And everyone jumped in. It was like, yep, we're going to make this happen. And the local Oklahoma dealers, you can use my e-tron, so the Audi doesn't have to ship one. And then he came along on the drive, which for me is probably one of the most amazing aspects of it. The general manager of a car dealer, the boss, took a week out of his own store to ride on this trip and then go through all of Fully Charged Live, and to hear him describe it, he's like, look, we actually believe we can make EVs really successful in Oklahoma, which is not a carb state, not a primary market area for anybody's EV. They're a little bit of an underdog in terms of a market, but he's like, we can be successful, but the only way we're going to be successful is if I learn. Yes. So I'm taking a week out of my store so that I can plant myself in an e-tron with you for 2 days and then continue through the weekend so I can learn about this, which is unheard of for most salespeople, let alone management of a dealer. Yeah. And by the end of the trip, I wanted to clone him for every dealer around the world of any brand. And Tulsa Tech was so cool. They didn't come along, but they said, here's our car. We trust you completely. We know you kind of love this car more than we do in some ways because it was so much your baby. Yeah. So feel free to see, touch, crawl in, whatever. Film what you want to film with it. So we did some cool stuff. We put it up on a lift and all sorts of things. Yeah. And then at the show, we didn't really encourage people to crawl through the car so much. We allowed a little bit of it carefully. But mostly they still just got to see the under the hood. And we opened all the compartments and, lots of little walk-arounds and guided tours of the thing. And it's the most preserved car I've seen outside of a museum, which was a really nice example. Yeah. It's really well taken care of. But it was a really unique opportunity for the public, too, just to get that close in such a casual atmosphere. It was so much fun.
Yeah, no, it was brilliant, wasn't it? And I think all the things that were there, the thing I expected, I thought this isn't going to come off, was the Rivian. So to see two Rivians there.
For sure, yes.
Which was just extraordinary. I mean, and this is why it's so tainted for me, because when they were there and I went and I think someone took a picture of me leaning on one of the Rivians. I felt
3 points of contact.
3 points of contact, and I really needed it at that point because I felt so lousy that day. It was so annoying because it was,
I know.
But that was it, and the response they got as well was absolutely
amazing. And to give them credit, they came out in the first place. They brought their displays. Yeah. They hosted a little evening reception on the Saturday night. But while they didn't put anybody on the panels, they actually didn't just bring vehicles, they brought a fair amount of very senior executives and engineering staff to actually sit and talk to everybody and get feedback the same way they do when they go see the reservation holders at their private events. And so, it wouldn't have been obvious that it was more than event staff there, but it really was. And even I was surprised as we went through the weekend and I'm like, hey, I know all you people.
Right.
You're the chief engineer, Charles Sanderson that was in our episode about Rivian. He was there. Yeah. And so it was neat to see them invest that kind of effort in bringing people, not just display vehicles.
But I think they shifted some units as well, from what I've gathered, which is pretty impressive. Yeah,
yes, for sure.
I mean, I think those cars are remarkable. I think, it was the thing about that particular company is, because you and I have discussed this before, but the Faraday Futures, the Lucids,
yes,
I want them all to work. I don't wish ill on any of them, but I kind of slightly squirmy and going, I don't know if this is going to work. But that one, I just felt as soon as I saw the Rivians and then heard the backstory of what they've been doing, you think, they have got a very good chance of actually being around in 10 years, actually making cars that people want.
There is occasionally a little bit of bless your heart involved with some of the startups and frankly some of the majors. But the interesting thing I see about Rivian, and it's a beautiful contrast to Tesla in some ways because everyone's focused on Rivian versus Cybertruck, but they could not be more opposite approaches. And what I mean by that is, and it works for Elon, but what he does, especially in Cybertruck, he basically decided what he thought would be cool. Yeah. And then put it out to the world and said, I believe that I know better than you do what you want.
Yeah.
Rivian has a very thoughtful approach, but they continue to really test the theory at all these public events and invite all this feedback and design all these features based on that feedback. And so they're completely different approaches, and it's not even a one's better than the other, just the difference is fascinating to watch it play out.
Because that was just the most extraordinary. Well, you were there when the reveal of that vehicle was. I think it was sort of semi-historic. The fact that it also went so badly wrong, but kind of didn't diminish it in some ways. It made it funny and
it made
ridiculous.
It cultier. The whole thing was culty to begin with.
Because they cut that. I was at a point where I went. They knew that those windows were going to crack. They did that on purpose because I don't know. I'm sure. Who knows? But it's such a ridiculous looking thing when you first see it, but it does start to make more sense.
Right.
I'm sure it's not going to look like that when it's finished. I'm sure it'll, the front of that car is a human scythe. It could,
right.
if that ran into any human beings, it's
there are aspects
5
of it
miles
that
an
wouldn't
hour.
be
It's
legal.
lethal.
Yeah, for sure. But it's interesting. It was fascinating to be there in the
It
audience.
must have been amazing. Yeah.
And I mean, it was not.
Was that the first Tesla announcement thing you've been to?
No, gosh, no.
Oh,
I've been to
right.
several of them. It's not a thing I try to go to, but especially because my husband worked there for years, I have been to several of the reveals of Roadster and S and X and so on. I think 3 was basically the only one I didn't go to. Right. But this one was very, very different. And all of the gaming beforehand of what's it going to be and is it going to be real. The sci-fi theme and being a much smaller event. And frankly, for the usual Tesla template, it was unusually devoid of both food and alcohol. And usually Tesla events there's lots of alcohol flowing by the time the car comes out, which often helps with the immediate reaction. They probably suffered a little bit in that regard on this one, because it went in 5 minutes from "We love you, Elon, will you marry me, Elon" being shouted from the crowd to a collective and not in a good way when the thing rolled out. And everyone immediately got on their phone, like checking Twitter to see if they were the only ones that had that reaction, and through the rest of the demonstration. So that was fascinating to watch. And by the end, a good 80% believed that was not the vehicle. They believed he was trolling them, that it was going to be a Steve Jobs, like, one more thing, and that the real truck would roll out at the end. But there was 5%, man, that are absolutely convinced that this is the car with 0 changes because Elon does not mess around and he never reveals a thing that doesn't follow through 100%. Whatever history notwithstanding.
Yes, yeah.
And the answer's probably somewhere in the middle of,
Yeah, of course,
multiple versions and things.
But it certainly
it
gets you a lot of attention if that's what you want in that sense, isn't it?
Yeah, and for certain companies, the sort of any news is good news is very real, and Tesla would get away with a lot of things that other manufacturers wouldn't. If that was Lucid coming out with that event, everything the same.
Or Hyundai or Nissan. If Nissan had revealed at Geneva Motor Show.
Yeah, if Ford did this as the new F-150, the same people would have said, "You have been smoking the marijuana that Elon did."
Yeah. No, it is extraordinary, isn't it? Yeah. Because then, so for your understanding of Ford, let's just quickly go over the Ford America, the F-150 pickup electrified. Is that do you think that's a real proposal? I mean, they were saying they were going to do that.
They are making out like it's a real proposal, and at this point, if it's not, I think they have some problems. Right. Yeah, I mean especially in the wake of the other trucks. They won't get away with messing around, because Ford's been a special case in that for the last 15 years or so, they've been a mile wide and an inch deep. Like a little bit of everything, but not really committed to anything. Right. And they're trying to kind of make their way back from that a little bit. And even the Transit announcement was funny to me, because I dug up on YouTube a video I did when they announced their last Transit electric vehicle 10 years ago. Wow. Really, at what point do you make this real? But I think people are kind of reassured by the Mach-E being as high volume as they're saying. Right. There's, the F-150 full electric is a bit of a risk, I think. I mean, in some ways, a really good plug-in hybrid would have made more sense from a market standpoint, and especially in the U.S., but most of the majors are kind of erring away from plug-in hybrids for policy reasons. They don't get enough carb credit, and therefore, why bother? That's interesting. Oh, right. Okay. Yeah, because, I mean, my attitude to plug-in hybrids has changed a bit, partly thanks to the Toyota self-charging hybrid. That's made me and it's not the technology that's at fault, it's just the marketing. The marketing. But there's a huge difference between a gasoline-only hybrid and a plug-in hybrid. Yeah. And I mean, seriously, even within the plug-in hybrid category, the 9-mile Prius versus a 53-mile Volt, hugely different products. Huge different, exactly. And so there is some advocacy brewing to help encourage not throwing the baby out with the bathwater and maintaining open-mindedness towards what we kind of loosely call strong plug-in hybrids. So sort of Volt or better in all vehicle classes. Yeah. So, especially in the U.S., especially in the middle of the country, especially for certain use cases, there's a lot of need for a 50-mile plug-in hybrid or an 80-mile plug-in hybrid. I think that's the thing. If it does 50 miles on batteries, it's a different minimum.
Machine.
Yes, right. And so that's kind of where we're... Right.
I had the plug-in Prius for a bit, and I think I got 12 miles sometimes.
Yes, on a good. Well, and I drive faster than you do. So.
Yeah, and that was desperately trying to keep it within.
Yes.
But so the other areas that I'm fascinated by are, certainly the trucks. So the Nikola truck and the Tesla truck. I don't know.
Certainly the heavy duty, the semi stuff.
The big monster trucks. I mean, have you seen anything of the Nikola truck at all?
I've seen lots of announcements.
Yeah. Yes.
I mean, I'm sure they won't appreciate the reference, but I think Nikola is one of the underdogs of the truck space for sure. I mean, it's a Faraday or Lucid of the truck space, probably, especially as Daimler and folks like that have really gotten into medium and heavy duty.
So some big truck manufacturers are going to do stuff, right?
So even in addition to sort of the Teslas and the Rivians of the world, the major incumbent truck makers, Peterbilt and those guys, are all starting to get into this, which really puts somebody like a Nikola at a relative disadvantage. But Nikola also has had a history of being a little smarmy in the PR side and marketing side, which... I mean, it doesn't bode as much confidence as I think they probably would prefer from people like me. Yeah.
And I mean, I don't know because every now and then you'll see, someone will post a film because they've set a video at a supercharger because there is a big truck, a Tesla truck there.
Yes.
But I'm not sort of seeing like fleets of them rolling out, but I don't know.
Well, and arguably Tesla's got bigger things to worry about in terms of production of 3 and Y and truck and all this other stuff. So I imagine at some point the story will be revised that it was only ever meant to provoke the Daimlers of the world into getting into the game. So they don't need to do their own now.
Right. Maybe, you might be right. But I mean, all those things, because that's the thing that we're just about to really cover here, is the kind of business case for vehicle to grid for, because that's the thing I've been thinking of, if you've got a car, I've got a vehicle to grid system here, I've got a car, I plug that in, I can run the house off the car.
Right.
Big deal. In a way, big deal, so what? But if you have 1 million cars, very big deal. If you have 100,000 trucks in your fleet with, 500 kilowatt hour batteries, they're not always, I mean, they're being driven far more than a privately owned car, but there's still times when they're just sitting there doing nothing.
Right. Well, and in some ways, the conversation has been evolving over the years to be less vehicle to grid per se, more vehicle to building or site.
Yes.
And so, I get it's not the hugest deal if you can run your house off your car, but for most retail people, that's the most they need. And if it avoids having to put a second battery on their wall in their garage, that can be great. The use case for a larger site could still be serviced that way with larger vehicles or more vehicles at the same site in an industrial location, for example. So it doesn't have to go back in the meter, but also with the microgrids becoming much more popular, we'll see more local exchange of energy that may never, or not in the near term, go really past the customer side of the meter from a utility perspective, which makes all of them more comfy anyway at this stage.
Right, yeah. But I mean, I think that's going to be, as that dawns on fleet managers and people who do fleets, that's one of the annoying events that's been cancelled that I was speaking at was a fleet managers conference thing, and I've done those before because the battle that you've got. I can see that not me, but the argument is winning. So 5 years ago, I went to one, and they were literally, their faces were just like, "What is this stupid man talking about? Why were you listening to this? I just want to go to the bar." They were utterly disinterested, and they're not anymore. They're now fascinated by all those things. Yeah,
but you're right that the economics will matter a lot because that's the thing still in their mind. It's a much more total cost of ownership driven conversation with fleets. And the economics of potentially vehicle to whatever in terms of the battery usage. And that's a good thing around whether it's GM or LG or Samsung just announced a solid-state battery improvement this morning. Getting more confidence in the batteries means the vehicle makers will start to allow more cycling.
Right.
And therefore good implications for vehicle to grid or building or anything else. Because the two main points of ambivalence are the vehicle makers who don't want a lot of extra cycles on the battery they have to warranty. And the utility side that doesn't want to have to deal with it from a economic and back-end office perspective. And the various antagonism towards net metering and things for solar already has implications on this too. So getting more confidence in the batteries and the automakers to all relax a little bit and go, okay, this is not going to single-handedly double cycles and kill our batteries and all those things we're worried about. Maybe we should allow a little bit more of this, even if it's for a price.
Yeah. And is that same movement happening then in the States? I mean, in terms of fleet managers, and because have you done talks to fleet managers?
Right.
I bet you have.
Yes, it's a very interesting and specific audience.
Yes, it is. Because the first one I did, I think, which was actually for Renault. It was for a French company, but in this country for Renault, and I've been on stage since the late 1970s in various forms.
Yes.
As a comedian, as a performer, as an actor. And I've never had two audience members. I've had people fall asleep during a show.
Yes. Yes, me too.
I've had people walk out. I've had everything.
Yep.
But this was, go on, it was in the morning as well. It wasn't at night, it was in the morning. I go in, there's two people asleep.
Oh my
very
gosh.
Obviously. It's a well-lit theatre. It wasn't like I
Right.
could see the audience. And I made fun of them. Not only were they asleep, I made fun of them all the way through. They were asleep when I went on stage. They were still asleep when I went off, even though people were I got them all to shout bang at once. And this is like 400 people. Not a flicker. Just not even. It was quite a loud noise. I just said, let's try and wake them up. And they slept through it. And we got them all I gave them a standing ovation at the end. Everybody stood up and looked at them and gave them clapping, and they were still there. But the fact that that's possible that was Renault dealers rather than fleet managers. But it was trying to convince them. And when you hear those stories, just like you said, your guy with the Audi guy in Oklahoma, there's a Renault dealership outside Edinburgh where the guy drives a Renault Zoe. He's obsessed with it. He's put in charges. He does the talks. He sold, I don't know what, 700-800 from one dealership at the time I spoke, a few years ago. There was another dealership in Bedford or somewhere, a small town in England, where they'd never sold one. He didn't like them. He didn't want them in the showroom.
Right.
That was, and they're independent companies. They're not owned by Renault.
Right,
so
exactly. They're independent. And that's how my husband and I met, because the original Saturn dealer he worked at, the general manager banned anybody from giving EV1 test drives, and therefore there were no cars to work on. And so at some point, Bob basically said, if I want to work on EV1s, I have to go to another store that's more receptive. And he came to one of mine, and that's how we met.
Wow, isn't that extraordinary? So that is not new. I mean, it's just such a... Because you'd think... Look, there's another product that you can... you've got somewhere where your job and your role is to sell stuff. Forget what it is. So you're selling hats, and then someone comes in with a hat that's a different colour, and you go, right, not having those.
Right.
Why sell it? You're just selling a hat. What's your problem? I don't know. It's an extraordinary attitude.
It is, but part of it's circular firing squad, because no one's going to sell something that they're not comfortable with, that they perceive takes them longer and is harder, whether or not the data actually backs that up. In some cases it does, in some cases it doesn't. And the manufacturers tend to point at their dealers and go, we can't control them, those crappy dealers that are independently owned. And B, here's a 3-hour online training that's never going to make anybody comfortable with selling them. So it's rather than this sort of shooting at dealers and pretending they're all assholes, we have to come up with better training, more experience. They should be taking them home and plugging them in at night, at least for a week or two, to get some sense of what this is like. It's not always rocket science.
No.
But we have to just sort of accept the experience can and should be improved if this is going to be successful.
Yeah. And I think it's also fair, if I think of the Nissan dealer that I've taken my car to twice to be serviced in 10 years.
Right.
And there's a guy there, the dealership, this is in Oxford, a Nissan dealership, who's really keen. He owns a Nissan Leaf, he drives it every day, he talks to people about them, he sold quite a few of them. But the struggle they had in the early days when there was a 30 kilowatt hour Leaf, and it's just, and it was winter, and people said it doesn't go as far as people, all those things. And the charger didn't work. We had real problems with public rapid chargers, which is it's improving, but it's still problematic.
Right, for sure.
That was a struggle. And I think that side of it is getting easier now.
No question. It's becoming a more familiar idea. The cars are getting better. The chargers are becoming more prolific. Yeah. There's still ways to go in some places, but it's not the slog it once was.
No. I think we should, in a few years' time, we'll be able to go, you young people don't remember how hard it was. Well, it's an absolute truism. When I first had an electric car, the iMEV, the Mitsubishi,
I had one for 4 years.
Did you? Oh, guys, I love that car. It's a great
right-hand
car.
drive Japanese one with snow tires in the US.
Oh my God. In California, you need snow tires.
I loved it. It was great.
I love that car. I drove it in snow here, quite deep snow. Couldn't do steering. It could only follow the car that was in front. But it was great. It didn't get stuck. Yeah. But it was. But there was, at the time I had that, there was one rapid charger in the UK, which I could just about get to. It was at the limit of the range. But then I'd get there and nobody knew how it worked because it was Japanese. It was imported. It only had Japanese text.
Right.
So
and that was a 60-mile car on a good day.
Oh yeah. Yeah, if you were careful, yeah. But I mean, but that's the difference between that and now. That's the kind of thing. It's very, very different. We just used a Instavolt charger, so 350 kilowatt capable charger. You just walk up to, you tap it with your debit card. Not goes beep. You plug it in and it's charging. You don't do anything else, and it's so quick and so reliable. Sure. You just go, please make them all like that.
Yes.
Which they are now. They now have to be in the UK. If you're installing a rapid charger, it has to have tap to pay on it.
Yeah, and there's the legislation being passed here too about multiple points of access. So
it's got to be.
Tap to pay is one of 3 or 4 that are starting to be required.
That's the same here. You can be a member. You can use an app as well, and it's cheaper generally if you are doing all that. But it's still the convenience of it is. I'm just keeping an eye on the time, and also I've got baked potatoes in the oven. That's the important thing.
Well, we cannot let you miss the baked potatoes.
I do not. Well, I don't want to burn them. I don't want to get in trouble.
For sure. And I don't want to be part of that.
But
there are priorities, dang it.
Yeah, exactly. Because what time is it there now? It's like midday,
noon.
Is it?
Noon,
yeah. It's not. It's dark here now.
We have surprisingly English weather today, though.
Oh, have you? All right. Okay.
It's all rainy and overcast.
Oh God, we had some sunshine today, so there we go. I can't believe it.
So you got it perfect.
Yeah. But listen, we've got to do this again. I want to talk to you again. We must do more podcasts, and thank you so much for being on the show. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a big round of applause. Chelsea Sexton!
Thank you to Chelsea for joining Robert on her first episode. We are very lucky to have you on our show. So lastly, subscribe to Fully Charged Podcast. It's free after all. Leave us a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts, as we get told about those ones, to be honest. Check out the Fully Charged Show website for a new range of sustainable merchandise. Our book, The Fully Charged Guide to Electric Vehicles and Clean Energy. I always forget its title, so I've noted it down. And our A to Z guide, which sorts out the wheat from the chaff in regards to who are the decent suppliers, which has a message in line with our own. And lastly, Patreon. 1,000,001 thank yous from all of us at the Fully Charged Show team. Without your help, I certainly wouldn't have been able to join the team originally as an editor, and I know that a world without Robert doing Fully Charged would be rather dull and uneventful. Again, from our whole team, thank you so much for your support. There is actually one last thing before we go. I'm currently in the midst of persuading Robert that we need an AMA, or Ask Me Anything, takeover of the podcast on a semi-regular sort of basis. So with this in mind, if you have a question that you would like to pose to Robert or the team here, Chelsea, Helen, Maddie, or the production team in general, why don't you record a voice memo on your phone and send it to production@fullycharged.show, and I will endeavour to make your voices heard. Just bear in mind, we expect a rather large number of these memos, so keep it short and snappy. Anything under 60 seconds is great. The better the question, the better the chance of you making it onto the show. That's your lot for this week, so if you have been, thank you for listening.